Morning, Dr. Brad.
What a
As
great
usual, we started this conversation out ruminating about the chaos in our individual lives. And then we rolled right into Brad brought up an interesting question about the Russians, which is the point he didn't get to make because I rudely interrupted him. So we have to still let Brad make his point. But I was trying to make a contrast, and he was saying, well, look at the Russians today and the Americans today. And I said, well, that's a really interesting contrast because, we have rule of law, but there are holes in the law and there's no monarch, right? And so we lack the ability to fix the holes in the law, right? They have a monarch and they have weak rule of law. But as Brad said, they have trifunctionalism. They actually have church, state, military, and law, right? They actually, now they're weak. They're weak. The law is weaker than our law because they don't have a Supreme Court that's separate from. But we do.
Well, it's like I would agree with that to the point where I go, it has not been demonstrated to me to be weaker than the weakness that has been.
Well, let me make my point, which is correct, right? So the you're correct. I mean, obviously. So what you mean is weaker in result, right? In other words,
yeah, that's what counts, man.
Yeah, well, I know, but let's just clarify. So the problem for the Russians is that, the problem for us is that we lack the monarchy. In order to, we can't appeal to the monarchy like they can, and basically threaten them with disposal, which is his big fear, right? The Russia's big fear. Threaten the monarchy with disposal if they don't fix the problem of government. Because it's hard to kill a government, but it's not hard to kill a monarch. It's been done richly and repeatedly in history, which is why it doesn't happen all that often, because the monarchs are terribly aware of the consequence.
Oh my.
So monarchies are not stupid about this. So the end result is that what happens is that you have this again, where we miss the monarchy, we have rule of law, but it has holes in it. So we can't fix the problem. They have a monarch, essentially Putin's a monarch, right? And they have a weak rule of law, right? They don't have a purely independent judiciary, but they do have a church and whatever. They have all these moral foundations that they maintain, and they work in the ethnocentric interest of the population. Okay, that's all well and good. So the difference is that they actually can react, right? I mean, they actually can respond quickly to crises or actions. So I actually thought was a great your comparison, bringing it up, which is they actually have trifunctionalism, and it actually works for the problems that we have, right? The problem is they lack the rule of law that we have that would allow them to fix their damned economy so they'd be as wealthy as Norway, which they should be. I mean, and by all intents, but that should be wealthy.
Well, they're being assaulted right now by the non-trifunctional West.
Well, no, hold on a second. Let me go. So they could be wealthy. Russians could be wealthy, right? And then they could be powerful. But they chose to run this gangster economy. In other words, we have some pretty serious problems with the way funds are transferred by our central government and centralization of power. But Russia has it 50 times worse. So because everything basically goes up and then is used to pay everybody off. That's how things work. And so so what's happened is they haven't built an economy because corruption is such an important part of maintaining it. And their corruption is very porous, meaning that you can steal a lot of money. It's not like, I mean, Nancy Pelosi and her dealings are nothing compared to, I mean, we don't even have people.
Oh no, I wouldn't look at her as she's a petty thief.
Right, no, but it's like everybody knows.
This Bankman Fried guy, he did quite good thievery.
Well,
And the corruption associated with this so-called Ukrainian war is of a caliber that is of equivalent nature.
all right. Well, because that's great, but let's pick something that's not like so loaded,
Well,
right?
it's billions of dollars being transferred, like in the $100 billion range. It's
It's
like
it's actually
that
neat.
deserves to
Well,
be loaded.
all right. You want to get on that? I want to pick
No,
something.
I'm just. It's like
No,
you're.
I'm going to tell you you're wrong.
I
All right.
know, but I regard it as a refusal to enter into the field of where the corruption is located.
Well, no, okay. You're trying to dramatize something for an agenda. I'm trying to make a general principle along the same lines as our original discussion, which
Okay.
is that 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 we have problems of corruption, and they're legitimate. In other words, we know that the policy always reflects special interests, not public interests. We know that the financial sector, as you've illustrated and brought up repeatedly, steals trillions, right?
Yeah.
Right. But that's technically speaking, that's bad regulation, right? It's not involuntary. People are doing it because they can get right. They're not doing it because it's actually corruption. I don't know how to describe it. It's bad. It's just not corrupt. It's like a very different thing from I'm going to pay you to do this, and so.
Okay, I disregard that as
Well,
an
you just don't care
apology.
about the subtlety of the difference, and I'm like, well, the subtlety is the difference between the government two different problems of government. Our government isn't protecting us from market forces. Their law isn't protecting them from political forces. And so I look at this as, okay, well, we have unregulated market forces and they have unregulated government forces. And so I'm trying to preserve the explanation which you laid out as your original argument. And I'm like, well, we have corruption. They have corruption. So all governments put money to uses with which some segment of the population disagrees. There's a difference between disagreeing with that expenditure and it being immoral or bad judgment or corrupt, right? I mean, now you could say that what we're doing in Ukraine, now I'm going to bring you back in, is immoral or done badly or whatever. It's hard to see it as it's not hard to see it as corrupt. But on the other hand, when you say, look, we're actually trying to get shit done here, and this is what it takes to get it done, that's different from systemic corruption, right? I mean, for example, the way you pick on Ukraine is you say, look, why is BlackRock doing handling all the money instead of the government? In other words, it used to be the military took responsibility for things like what did we do for Germany? The Marshall Plan, right?
Yes.
Right. That's a very above board strategy for reconstruction. My problem with this thing is that it's done by BlackRock, who we know is working against the public interest, right? BlackRock works against the public interest. Now, like when they buy up houses, right? They're making a good financial decision, but they have a confluence of interests that are in conflict, right? So the minute the government works through BlackRock, they're taking advantage of. They have a very skilled set of professionals who are able to execute very complex financial deals without anyone in the government actually needing to be equally competent, right? I mean, this is just simply true, right? Now, on the other hand, then you go to what are they doing? Well, they're already negotiating how to do the reconstruction of Ukraine. It's already in progress. They're beginning the Marshall Plan now to reconstruct Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is taking some of this money because it's fucking Ukraine, and I understand how shit works there. And they're like, well, let's skim a little off the top here because, we can be safe and sound, right? And that shit's happening. And then it's getting back to the Democratic Party as reward. that's corruption, right? Now, so I want to distinguish because this
That's
is
what we know about.
well, no, well, that's FUD. That's not an argument. So,
Okay.
no, that if
I'm not regarding it as an argument, it's an observation, sir.
okay, so no, so if we look at it, there is a just program, just wise investment going on, which is twofold. We're economically hooking the Ukrainian government into us forever, right? Which is what one of the things. The second thing, we're getting an opportunity to profit from hooking the Ukrainian government into us forever. It's being done by a company with usually competing interests that is, by its definition, BlackRock, essentially corrupt, right? Corrupt in the sense that they are using market abuse versus political abuse. This is important distinction. BlackRock can get away with buying up houses because our government hasn't stopped them from engaging in it. That's different from BlackRock paying off members of government in order to do something independent of the market. So I'm distinguishing market activity, which should be regulated.
I would like to present my argument now.
Well, I'm almost done with the third point.
I apologize.
So you have the geostrategic issue, right, which is in our interest. You have the reconstruction interest, and you have making sure that we have a way to recover assets that it's in other words, the cost of giving away these assets through the profits of reconstruction. So I look at this as pretty smart, right? A way of doing things. Now, so that's how I look at it. I just don't like that BlackRock is making the profits instead of the fucking government. In other words, I think those profits that are made with American dollars, right? That are guaranteed by the United States government. And that is a common problem in the American system. That's different from paying you to not do something, right, in the government, or paying you to do something to lie about you're producing armor and goods. I mean, it's a very different thing from corruption. It's bad judgment. So I want to make sure people know there's bad policy. There's bad judgment, and then there's corruption, and we tend to sort of, in the West, we moralize and throw these things into the same bucket, and they're not. There's bad policy, there's bad judgment, and then there's bad judgment meaning bad governance, and then there's corruption, and those are three different things. And I don't see corruption. I see corruption going on. Yes. On the other hand, our job. There's always going to be corruption if we don't police against it. So anyway, go ahead. Now make your point.
My point is this: that I think that you're underestimating the corruption of our government by virtue of the fact that the government. You say they're not getting paid off, and I'm like, I assure you, they're getting paid off.
Who's that?
And the government is getting paid off, and it's demonstrable. It is demonstrable. May I finish? It's demonstrable in that Page and Gillens did the study on the impact of money on politics and policy, and they demonstrated that the average population has the will of the public is insignificant. It has no significant impact on policy, whereas the will of the wealthy has significant impact on policy. So right. that is a demonstration of the corruption of the system, because it does not represent the people. So it claims to represent the people, and it does not. So it's like my point, the point being of this conversation started with the fact that I said the West is not trifunctional at this time. And the Russians, in fact, are trifunctional at this time, and that's the difference. And I'm objecting to the romantic viewpoint that the West is somehow superior to the Russians at this time, because they're not functioning in the way the West is not functioning properly trifunctional. And I don't know how long it's been since it has been. It may be 150 years.
You made too many convenient leaps there.
I apologize for that.
I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't really want to. I don't like arguing with you.
Okay.
But you know, you're making my point, which is that our failure is due to failure to regulate markets. In other words, voluntary or transactions are insufficiently insured, whereas they have completely fraudulent.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to apologize for the Russian system. I'm not trying to. I'm just like, this is my point is that the markets are not regulated on purpose in the United States.
Oh, I agree with that. And so the question is like, this is another thing like the conspiracy, the demarcation, the conspiracy demarcation problem. So the corruption demarcation problem. And it also goes to the conservative moralizing problem. Is that, no, this is really fascinating psychological problem of conservatives. Is we know that conservatives have a psychological problem of wanting things to be over and done so they can go on with them, which simply allows for the use of incrementalism by the left. We know that men are too tolerant of women, which allows for the undermining by women. So there's consistency here, right? I'm making an important argument about psychological consistency between the male and female approaches to the world and the big fault of conservatives, which is their own fault because they think they're right and they're not, right? So the problem is male things wanting to be over and done with so we can go back to what we're doing, right?
Right, I got things to tend to here.
Right. Well, I mean, that just says I'm already responsible for stuff. I want this responsibility off my plate. But the female says I'm not responsible for stuff, and therefore I can keep at it. So if you want to know the primary difference between left and right means of political warfare, this is the problem. Why does this warfare exist? Well, it's because we don't sufficiently police against the left feminine means of warfare, right? Same fucking problem. So the conservative takes this problem further and it says you should behave morally, which is as stupid as the left saying you should behave morally. Instead of you saying, what are the incentives we have put together? And taking the responsibility of putting the incentives together.
We agree.
So that's conservative moralizing. Now, once conservatives are moralizing, they can engage in conflation, right? So is this a problem? Are these two things equal? You don't like them equally, right? You dislike them equally, but are they actually equal? No, because you've based your argument, not you. Conservatives base their argument on this presumption that we should act morally instead of by incentives, as if we all have the same moral intuitions, right?
Wow.
Right. So this hierarchy of failure in conservative masculine thinking is pretty endemic. So we get down to this is why can't we solve the problem? Because conservatives are naturally cognitively unable to grasp the problem as a series of incentives that have to be put into organized principles that can be continuously adjudicated independent of your moral intuition or your perception of responsibility or conception of good. So the reason I feel like my project failed reaching the right, my project, my work, when I tried to go out and reach is what I learned is males, conservatives are cognitively incompetent in the ability to construct a system of rules and regulations by operational incentives, which require deep knowledge of each circumstance under which incentives are applied. So what happens is you get this tendency of conservatives to be one and done, quick and over, moralizing, believing that they're right, having excess confidence despite the fact that they're too fucking ignorant to know the incentives that exist at the level of precision necessary to regulate the behavior that they're objecting to. So I get really frustrated by this, and I realize that it's fucking pointless because conservatives are just as fucking stupid as liberals. And for different reasons. Where liberals are saying you should hold on, this is important. Because I got to do the equilibrium. So where the conservative will act by feel, and they'll actually act by feel, but they'll deny those feelings of difference exist. Conservatives never even get to the point where you can have an intelligent discussion about regulating things by incentives. So what you get fascists, get it over and get it done by the way I understand. You get Christians, get it over it and get it done by the way I understand. You have traditionalists, get it over and get it done by the way I understand. When the answer is the way you engineer human societies is just like you engineer anything else. What's the way we engineer human societies? By laws. How granular do the laws have to be? It's not that they have to be granular. Laws have to be granular. Laws have to be very simple because they have to deviate from natural law the least. But that's different from saying the regulations don't have to be granular because the incentives at some given level, right, are God knows what they are. It's why economists always say, economists are very conscious of the fact that I'm a labor economist. I understand what's going to happen in the labor market. It doesn't mean I have any fucking clue what's going to happen in the commodities market. Right? I'll probably be more wrong than the average guy on the street. Right? And so you'll see this among physicists. I'm not a gravity specialist, right? There are people who specialize in gravity. I'm not able to answer that question. I can say that in the literature, we know and gravity tends to work this way, but I don't know how it applies here. And so this is the problem with conservatives. Conservatives are as fucking stupid as liberals.
Are you good?
Thus endeth the fucking lesson.
So it goes like this, is I don't know that stupid is the right terminology.
It's the right fucking term.
I know, but I regard it as it's shorthand for it. There's a scientific term that will be better, which is
yes,
it's behavioral economy.
The conservative behavioral economy is focused on I am responsible for what is in my domain. You are responsible for what is in your domain. You are failing at your responsibility in your domain. But they have no idea how to make you responsible for your domain because while conservatism scales better, right, it's still an intuitionistic frame of mind rather than an empirical one.
Right, that's my point.
Right, and so because let's reciprocate. Say it's also the same on the left, right?
Yes.
Emotions don't scale. They scale worse than conservatism doesn't. The difference is they actually get regulation.
What do you mean by that?
They have no problem making rules.
Oh, not at all.
Right? We have a problem making rules. Well, the problem, it's not really that difficult. Like I said, our problems almost always come down to nobody before us has created a universal system, value neutral system of measurement of everything in the fucking planet. And I know how crazy that sounds, right, to people who don't know our work, right? Just painfully true.
It must sound crazy.
It must. Just is what it is, right? I mean, science is science. Science turns out science has got one rule to it, and we just obey it, right? So we've got a system of measurement for it, and so we can make simple general rules that apply at all stages of the hierarchy. But the problem is if it's like when I say, well, if you and I say we just need the reciprocal assurance of sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity, reciprocal assurance, which just means equality of sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity, and display word indeed, limiting us to markets for via positiva and via negativa adversarial reconciliation at the cost of the suppression of reproduction of the unfit. Right? I mean, that's the science, right? I mean, that's it. Now, the problem is you got to say, okay, what is that? How does that turn into regulation on our behavior? Because the logical connection between that and necessary rights, duties, and obligations, right? Rights, obligations, and alienations. Well, that's not quite so clear, So we have to then break it down to what is these words sovereignty and demonstrated interest. What does reciprocity mean? Within reciprocity, what does truth mean? Justifiability mean? Right? We have to break it into those things, and therefore, then we have to say, okay, given that we've enumerated the sovereignty, the sovereign, we've enumerated this overall collection. We've enumerated the sovereignty, demonstrated interest, reciprocity, and testimony or truth. We've enumerated those things. How do we adjudicate those interests as a series of rights, obligations, and alienations? Well, we go through and we say, we just enumerate these things down. Now, in some cases, it's like causal density can get pretty high.
Yes.
Right. So, for example, one of the reasons morality becomes complicated and people think it's relative is because there's a pretty big difference between the portfolio of trades that we make in a society, right? Right. In one society, it might seem immoral, but it's actually the only moral way to make things happen. Right. I mean, so because there's app venues that aren't possible because they're not trustworthy enough, or they're not developed enough, or whatever. But you understand that the moral thing underneath each of that portfolio is the same. It's still reciprocity within limits of proportionality and sovereignty and demonstrated interest. Well, but who determines the scope of sovereignty? Well, it's determined by who's the productive factor: the village, the family, the extended family, the nuclear family, or the individual. Well, I mean, your portfolio of morals is going to be different depending upon that thing, but it's still the same basic truth. So we have to give people the ability to understand that, and the courts the ability to adjudicate it. If we've done that well enough, if you find something, look at how much shit we find objectionable. I mean, I'm not saying that the public is always right, far from it, right? I mean, when we say the public doesn't get what they want, well, I mean, in a lot of cases, that's good, right? What?
Hanging out with Curt, it's fun. It's just funny because it's like there's obvious truths that are seldom spoke.
Well, right, but that's not true of the negativas. Like the public might think immigration is good, and it's fucking horrible, right? The public might think that Social Security and Medicaid, well, these things are, the way they're implemented is fucking terrible, right? I mean, they're predicated on the false promise of the possibility of infinite growth. So I mean, so the public doesn't necessarily know what to do. The public does know when shit's wrong, though, and that's the whole thing. What you and I focus on, what the team focuses on, is we don't have to know what's good. We have to know that if you take all the bad out of something, whatever's left isn't bad. And so we have to give people these tools. And the problem with conservatives is they don't want to do the work to learn that. And we're sitting here, and you and I are trying to make it simple enough that they can.
Yeah, it's not atypical. It's like this. It's a specialty operation to understand what is to be understood.
Yes.
And so it's like so what I sense is that your fur has been rubbed the wrong way because you discovered something you didn't expect to find among the conservative side.
Yeah. You asked me why I was so pissed off. I've never explained it with that degree of precision before. But yeah, that's why I gave up. I mean, I tried. You saw how hard I tried. I did thousands of fucking King of the Hill games, right? Over and over and over. I'm like, there's gotta be a way to reach you fuckers. And you realize it's the same fucking problem in each sex through a different look through the prism. And it's so goddamn frustrating that I'm like, we're the heroic conservatives and libertarians. We can solve this fucking problem. And you realize, no, you're just as fucking dumb as the other guy. It's just different. They're just less wrong. Right? I mean, it's just so exasperating. Sorry. You love making fun of the fact that I'm not as cool, collected, stoic.
No, you're all right, man.
As you are.
I find you very amusing because it's like you're turning over rocks and you're doing your science, and it's like, fuck, a spider.
Yes. Actually, just like
that wasn't expected, right? And it's still kind of what I find amusing is it's still got your spider senses up. You're just annoyed at that damn spider because you got.
I mean, come on. Okay, so you can tease me, but you and I and the guys are all the same. We're all hyper moral.
Yeah,
we're all of our whole team is hyper. That's what makes us. I mean, we have the systematizing thing, but we start out as we're all hyper moral. We don't, how do you measure that? That would be an interesting question, right?
Yes.
So that we could measure that as different, but we're all hyper moral, and it's because we're all hyper responsible, right? I mean, so we our whole team, we feel our responsibility transcends the individual. Like we feel.
That's right.
And so we have this particular cognitive bias for some reason, and it's powerful, right? It's a powerful influence. I mean, I know you pretty well, and you know me pretty well, and I know just how powerful your moral intuition is, which is it's intimidating. And I know mine is. The thing is, I know where mine comes from my mother, right? And so I know where mine comes from, right? It's this French Catholic, love everybody, do the right shit, right? And then I got my father stand behind them with his puritanical, or else, right? I mean,
right.
So I know where this cognition comes from, but essentially we're all hyper moral, we're all hyper responsible. Even if like you get somebody like I find it interesting that Martin says he's not conscientious, which is really it's more of a focus thing, right? Which I find humorous because he's hyper moral, he's hyper disciplined, right? He's hyper effective, but he views himself as, and he's taken the test, that he has low conscientiousness. I'm like, that test exists to measure whether you're going to be a good clerical or worker. Right, it's not the same kind of thing. I mean, look at his conscientiousness and suppression of falsehood.
Right.
Or Luke's conscientiousness and the suppression of I don't know how you would put it, naivety. Probably irresponsibility. Huh?
That's good.
Or Noah's suppression of irresponsibility for being paternal, masculine and paternal in family, and taking responsibility for the adulting of your children, not the comfortable persistence of your children, but the adulting of your children. He's very good. So all of us are sort of in this sort of frame. Sorry, I lost the train there. You had a point that was really good. I was trying to amplify it, and I lost it.
Good. It's good. The issue is this. It's just that it's a specialized operation that we're conducting here, very specialized, and it does not require everybody to understand all the nuance.
No, they have to understand. It's like you have to know that a thing is possible, not that you have to be able to do it. As I always say, right? I can understand quantum mechanics as you walk through it.
Right.
I can't remember how to do it myself.
That's
I've tried and I lose my way, whatever. I'm like, what am I supposed to do here?
no, it is like, to me, there's a leadership function there that is to occur among people who do not understand the detail. And it's not necessary for them to understand the detail. It's necessary for us to provide the incentives to make them understand the benefits of following.
Yeah, and I think the thing we've discovered that's new, that's a radical, I mean, there are things, we've done a lot of novelty, right? It's not, it's what we've done is non-trivial. Unlike most thinkers who discover one thing, we've sort of, I mean, we're sort of on the scale of Darwin. He discovered one thing and it turned out to be a really fucking profound thing, right? We've maybe, I'm not sure we've discovered, but it's more than one thing, right? It's one thing is related to this generational leap. But the thing we've discovered is that it's not that either sex is right. It's that either sex tends to be right in a domain, right? And that we're looking for, in other words, not sex, but I mean cognition, what I mean sex differences in cognition.
Right.
That sex differences in moral intuition, cognition need to find opportunities for reciprocity, right? And that's different from saying follow. That means search, right? In other words, we have to find, you have to say, okay, I believe correctly that, you know, if you're on the female side, I believe correctly that this would be good. You're not wrong. It might be. And the right would say, I believe correctly that this would be good, and it's the mirror image. Well, the reason is the difference in responsibility between the two, right? So you may have a legitimate demand. Well, we can determine if that's a legitimate demand, all right, market demand. In other words, we have to,
Right.
Education is a great example, right? Education, you want education for your kids so they're successful. But on the other hand, the rest of us who are responsible want your kids to have it as a defense, as in our own defense, right? That's a reciprocal exchange. But yet there are things that I can't think of many. I might have to work at this one, where the left wants something and the conservatives are over demanding it. That might be healthcare. So, for example, with healthcare, it's possible to do the Singapore model and solve this problem, which retains responsibility because you're always involved in partial payment. It retains responsibility, yet subsidizes, we insure one another, which is what the top says, right? Reciprocal insurance of self-determination by self-determined means by sovereignty demonstrated interest, right? So we insure each other against acts of nature, but not acts of laziness or ill will, right? So I mean, it's something is, should we insure people against smoking and obesity? Probably not. You know, do you want to do that though? All right. Should we insure people against all other health questions? Probably. Now you say, now that seems kind of cruel, right? And so now if it's kind of cruel, now you're going to violate the principle of proportionality, which is that, well, you know, you didn't outlaw cigarettes and you didn't outlaw carbs and sugars. And so now you baited me into the hazard, and because I lack the agency and will, and that's a genetic thing. So I lack the agency and genetic will. So now you're saying that it's that you violated proportionality, and my will is then to defect because you're not insuring me. You didn't not only insure me, but you also didn't bring about the end of the moral hazard. So there's ways of there's questions. In other words, the whole point I'm trying to get at is that both sides tend to overdo it. Right, responsibility tends to be overdone because people, frankly, don't have the agency. I have,
Right.
You know, autism, ADD, or I can't stop myself from working. Right, but that doesn't. What's the negative externality? There's not.
Right.
There isn't one, right? But
Well,
well, there is. There are.
Your health is going to suffer, and your insurer is going to be
Right,
overpay.
exactly. And it's not been good for my wives either and my kids. So, but there are other kinds of AD, of attention deficit, where people just can't organize their day. Right. I mean, that has externalities and it has internalities and externalities, but is that their fault? Right. Now, if you go out and you decide to
No, it's an interesting function there. How about discuss that word briefly, because I have a back problem myself, okay?
yeah.
And it is
Tell
congenital.
you that it's that kinky sex you had in college. If you hadn't done that, you'd
What
be
it
fine.
is. But so yeah, there's that. But it's like this. So, but I came to this conclusion, which is kind of a funny thing, because it's like it's a congenital issue, and I had thought previously that it was not my fault, and I'm like, it's no one else's goddamn fault. It is my fault by virtue of the fact that it is mine, and I take full ownership of it and responsibility for it, and it is no other person bears any responsibility for it.
No, this is true. There's no responsibility for it. On the other hand, um, we all, there, a society really exists. Its first principle is reciprocal insurance. That's what the state is. It's an insurer of last resort.
Right.
So the question is, what are we going to insure? And
Right.
what we've decided so far by just evolutionary discipline is we're going to insure people against what we call acts of nature.
Yeah.
But we're not going to insure people about acts of will. And so, for example, we don't insure you against criminality.
Right.
The consequences of criminality. And this is where free will comes from. Free will is a question of whether you're liable or not. Well, are you liable for an act of nature? Well, you're not liable for it, right? But then we can insure one another from it. And this turns out to be an extraordinary benefit because all of us at some point are subject to acts of nature, right? Even ones that you would think to be marginally predictable. Like great example is you're sitting at the fucking stop sign and there's cars all around you, right? And the fucking dump truck loses its brakes. It tries to take the turn and it sideways falls on you and turns you into human pizza. This happens way more frequently than you'd think, right? I know because I watch these things before I go to bed at night. I don't know why it comes.
Oh my.
So this particular incident happens whether the driver's asleep, he puts the brakes on too early, he's using his phone, and then and the real answer is truck drivers try to get out of the way. The right answer is almost always throw the brakes on and just stay where you're going, right? Because you'll actually produce the least sequential damage that way. Whereas turning usually turns out to be far worse because you distribute the mass of the vehicle over a broader area with more intensity, right? So anyway, so am I going to insure you against that? Well, I mean, there's a big difference in think of it this way, in the externalities that result. If I know you're going to insure me against acts of God, basically random acts of nature, then most of my life consists of just worrying about if I'm moral.
Okay.
Whereas if I'm against nature, then all of a sudden I've got to create a huge defensive bulwark in my life against acts of nature, which turns out to be incredibly expensive. So the comparison is, if you go to South America, which I can't bear it, and you see all the fucking bars on the windows, right? Like even if you go to Switzerland, it always amazes me. All those little houses in Switzerland, they have those fucking steel shades on them. They can lock the house down like a goddamn fortress. Well, in part because they're not occupied all the time because they're resort homes. But I mean, if you have to live like that, what's the cost of living defensively? Whereas what is generated by you living morally and with and searching for opportunities instead of searching for opportunities to defend. So
Mm,
we'll end up
mm.
with a huge increase in economic velocity, cooperative velocity, and stuff. So if we insure people against acts of nature, but we punish them for violations of what do you call it? Freedom. What do I call it?
Acts of will.
Acts of will. Then we end up with producing the maximum opportunity for everyone, and we would think it's expensive. It's just not. Turns out it isn't. Turns out it's way cheaper to insure people against these things than it is to pay the costs of everybody living defensively, right? Because you're more willing to take what we call trust games, right? Engage in trust games across the scale, because we don't compartmentalize really, right? So if you get a metaphysical presumption about the world, you apply it to every, and like what used to make me crazy about my customer Boeing is they bought like fucking they buy fucking toilet paper with the same degree of precision they buy airline parts. I'm exaggerating, but it would always seem that way. As like you don't have to be that serious in your purchasing department about the acid percentage of the brown paper towels you use in the washroom. I mean, it's just buy what's fucking cheap and does the job, right? I mean, right. And so, but the process they have is ridiculous. I mean, things might have changed now. This is back in the early 2000s, right? So it's 20 years now. So I had them as a customer. Anyway, so I mean, but that kind of framework permeates all human existence.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, how did I get on here? You were making a really good point, and I tried to illustrate it.
It's like,
so I went on a rattle.
You're doing fine. So the issue is the specialization of the work we do. Our job is to find ways that will provide solutions and incentives for the people that they will understand.
Yeah, even more so, here's the extreme result. We want people to trust that if they found something irreciprocal going on, or what they considered immoral going on, there's either two things happening. One of three things happening. Oh, I see, it's a trade. Right? We made this for that, that's fine. Right? And that trade should be documented. Our law doesn't do that today.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so if there's a trade, like right now, the conservatives would like to trade almost anything for elimination of the Department of Education. They've offered everything. They said, I don't care. You can have this, this, this. We got rid of DOE because it's destroying our culture. Right? They've said this repeatedly. So there's a bunch. So conservatives are always willing to do this trade, and liberals aren't, because they always, anyway, for the same reasons. So there's a trade going on. So we want the American people to trust that if they looked, they would find a trade.
Okay.
That if something was discovered that was not a trade, that it would be correctable by as reliable a means as the courts, not the legislature.
Right.
And third, that if anything systemic was wrong, it would be correctable. And of these things, the only thing that's novel, right, there's two dimensions here, is we're explaining that's all possible. And we're restoring it. The thing that's novel to them is that this trade thing, right? Because we are different. We aren't equal. Our moral intuitions differ. And it's important that they differ.
Right.
Because we're dividing up the time-space continuum, time-space population continuum, right? We're dividing that continuum up by different sensitivities, just like, I don't know, I suppose ants and bees and whatever that divide up labor, but we're dividing the labor the same way. And
Mhm.
And the primary way we divide the labor is by the sex differences in moral intuition, right, which is predator versus prey, and then the fact that we have different ability and agency among the classes. And so if you know that this is a resolvable problem, right, then you could say, well, okay, well, we're kind of screwed down here. I was like, yeah, but that's a fact of reality that we would need a trade. Almost always, because this is what happens in history, the trade is you trade behavior for redistribution, which is okay.
Yeah.
And that's all people really want. Now you say, well, I have to give you the ability to trade behavior for redistribution. That means I have to train you, because if you could have it without the training, well, it turns out that most people are effing trainable. It's just expensive to train people. So
Right.
we've done the exact opposite, right? We've said, you're a special, glorious flower that will bloom into whatever. We're all beautiful.
Why?
And the answer
Based non-training.
is that it's the difference is that people actually need training, because you're a genetic machine that learns to adapt idiosyncratically by random. It's not even environment; it's just random associations in your head. So anyway, so in the end, that's the fundamental thing. I feel like we have to produce trust that the system can work. They don't have to understand it; they have to be able to trust it. And the only way they're going to trust it is because it's demonstrated trustworthiness.
Right.
And then we have to explain what the limits of trust are, which is that we aren't all one. We shouldn't all believe the same. We have an understanding of what the world needs from our perspective, and we are trying to put together a trade. Now, will people try to do scam trades and stuff? Yeah, but they're explicable, right?
Right.
All right. So the whole point is you create a reasonable dialogue that doesn't say to any party you're wrong. You're saying to every party, yeah, I understand what you're saying. How do we get there? We can only get there through a trade. And you might say, I don't want to do the work for that. Well, I mean, I don't want to do the work for lunch either. We all got to do the work. And most of the time, the work required of the people that are less genetically fit for modernity is just training. And if you're not telling them they're bad, because we know Christian training works. It works for fucking 55 IQ people. Christian training works. Sorry, end of goddamn story. If Christian training works, it fucking works. All right. We know that military training works, right? It works for fucking people down into the 80s. All right. It absolutely fucking works. We know rhetorical training, discipline, educational. It works for people down into the 105s, right? I mean, and above that, I mean, it doesn't goddamn matter, right? I mean, they've got to be able to do what we do, which is non-trivial, but that's just a matter of do they feel like doing it versus figuring out how to make cream puff cherry pies on Tuesday. I don't know, right? I mean, it's a difference. So we're offering the world a solution that's pretty. It doesn't say you're wrong.
Right.
It's a matter of how do we get there. All right, I went down on a goddamn rant there that was an hour long. So, and you started it with.
Sorry.
You don't know.
I will take full responsibility.
Yeah, because it was fucking awesome. Which was the trifunctional analysis between the two civilizations, which is a great. And what I didn't bring in was the French, right? I didn't bring in the French, which is the French were the most backward government in Europe at the time of the revolution.
Right.
And like Russia is the most backward government at the time of the revolution. And these are just things that are just an ongoing process. As what I say, we the demand for individual responsibility spreads from west to east, and the world doesn't want it, and the people in governments are saying have profited too much from saying we'll be responsible for you and we'll profit like hell for it. Whereas it turns out that your cheapest way of living is to actually maximize your responsibility.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so I feel like I didn't have too much coffee or anything. That was just natural.
Straight up.
I
Wow.
feel like I've worn you out this morning.
It's good, man. So I'm reading this book, and I will show the book to the public. This book here. This is a very interesting book. And the thesis of it is that the digitization, it's related to our work, which is the increasing precision of information available based on the digital trails we all leave everywhere, and the commodification of the trails, because the people who have the aggregate information are able to predict what's going to happen next with greater precision than they were before. So they're not guessing as much.
All right. I wanted to get that, and I went another direction. It ended up being wrong. So try that again.
The issue is this: the digitization of the image created by the digital presentation of people in the course of their lives, their behavioral tracking, allows for the aggregators of such information to have a greater degree of precision for prediction of human behavior in the future.
Correct.
And so what they're attempting to do is to monopolize that power, if they can, at the expense of the public.
Well, okay, so let's just formalize it. So by the collecting all this information, they are able to identify patterns in the population that have more predictive power than any predictive power we've had in the past. Right? That provides an asymmetry of information from which they can profit. That's their side. And if, like all knowledge, this is the problem with stock markets, right? If you know if you have information that the stock market can use, it will adapt and therefore destroy the predictability. So predictability in the stock market, like predictability among human futures, is due to asymmetry of information. Which is why the only people that profit really are big systems that have inside information. Right? The inside information or information is otherwise too expensive to obtain by the individual, which is why Bloomberg terminals make so much money per person per year, right? Is because they consolidate information from so many sources that isn't available to the individual. And so the individual is dependent upon networks of people who have Bloomberg terminals. Right, and then the people above them who pay for Bloomberg terminals by the virtue of their inquests and information streams obtain basically inside information, which we are told they don't have, and which they say that when they do have it, they hold in trust. Now, and I've been through enough going public games that I can tell you that's a fucking joke and a half. So that's not true. So it's all designed to take advantage of the retail investor. So, which is why you don't do retail investment unless you have inside knowledge, right? Like if you understand batteries, you know where to invest, right? I mean, you understand mines, right? Your example, you understand mining, you can know where to invest, right? But you have to have that inside information. So they're using this inside information. Now the question is, can they manipulate us with this information?
Yes.
Or can they merely take advantage
Oh.
And these two different things. It's important because if I can predict what you're going to want next year, it actually will benefit you, right? Because right. But if I can predict how to fuck with you so that you'll want this instead of that, that's not okay.
And
All
of
right,
course,
and
we know
that's
that social media is doing the latter,
yes, sir.
right? I'm not sure that Amazon is doing the latter instead of the former.
No, I understand you.
So I mean, there's like it's just it's like force. It's information. It's not the information that's the problem. It's what's to be done with it. The question is, how can we regulate what's done with information we can't fucking see? But if we could see, it would invalidate the use of collecting it because it would cause us to change our behavior. Now, of course, my attitude is that, well, we should know what that information is and we should change our behavior accordingly. What we'd find out is we would lose our mistrust and we'd find out that we wouldn't actually change it much anyway. We'd actually might narrow it to, in other words, with fewer marginal variations. So we'd actually do better for all of us. Does that make sense? Because that would eliminate all the false promises that people could make to us. So I'm making your argument for you very indirectly, which is that the fact is they don't give transparency to us allows the advertisers to benefit at the expense of consumers and producers. In other words, the advertising companies, the platforms, to benefit by the false promise of telling vendors that they will have access to a market, right? That would not exist if the market had the information that the advertiser has. So yes, it's fucking bad in that sense. Is it bad? It's not necessarily bad. It could be better for the public. And so the question is, are they earning justly or unjustly? Well,
Yes.
I mean, they're doing work to justly earn an informational advantage.
They
But
are doing
they're
work, but
sequestering the knowledge.
they're seeking to make the people do the work of generating the information to populate those databases.
Yeah, but the people don't mind. And they don't, it doesn't seem to work against their interest. In other words, it's
Well,
not.
now I'm looking at the manipulative function associated with this, which is the political implications of having emotional manipulations being performed on them by various actors.
Right. So sorry, I meant to distinguish between market advertising and political advertising. And so you're looking at the whole, and I didn't look at the whole. So you just went out of focus. Is that because I'm drinking? I haven't been drinking.
I don't
haven't
recall
been smoking anything funny. I haven't taken any funny little pills. So okay. So you're right. So let's talk about how that information can be used to fuck with the public, because we know it does, right? We know they do.
Yeah, it's just awful.
So that's the problem.
Right. That's the problem, and that has to be regulated. I mean, it's that behavior has to be made illegal.
I'm not sure it can be.
I think you're right.
The information will always make its way. I found out somebody got a copy of some data the other day that I was like horrified. All of it? Yeah, all of it. And I was like, there's no, nobody's safe, right? Information will get out. Any information that can be had will get out.
Right. But the issue is so Facebook was doing experiments on emotional contagion and manipulating emotionality among target populations and measuring the result in real time, and they demonstrated the capacity to do so. And there's ethical issues related to doing experiments on people without their knowledge that don't have to be answered or discussed, but it's part of the process. And it's like They demonstrated the capacity to influence the emotionality of the target populations without that target population's knowledge.
Right, because we're environmentally affected.
Sensitive, right? And so the instrumentalism is what they call this in this book, the manipulation of the public.
Well, I mean,
by
that's
information.
I'm not concerned with can we manipulate the public. I'm concerned with do we manipulate the public and how? For example, what is this is the difference between conservatives educate, right? That's what the left hates. That's why they got to silence us, because we educate, right? And so they shut us down for two reasons. One is because we're better at memeing, which is we're better at ridicule than they are because they're more ridiculous, because they're patently ridiculous. Right. So, I mean, it's just an obvious reason why we can make it work, because there's no logical consistency to it. It's just emotional consistency. Right. And so there's no logical consistency left. So, of course, we win the meme wars because they're all logic puzzles. Right. I mean, it's a logic game. So it's obvious why we'd win. Right.
You can't play that one with an emotional.
They can't play it because there's no logic to it. So, so they had to shut the right down for that reason. And the second problem is they had to shut down the education side of the right? Because we educate, we don't inspire. In other words, the way they do, which is emote, we educate, and so they've tried to shut down the right's ability to both equally undermine or expose as well as undercate. Well, and that's because their whole thing is emotional manipulation. And so what you're saying is any increase in the ability to engage in emotional regulation, regulation, is that the word? Emotional manipulation is a fucking problem, because it's not subject to rational, logical.
That's right.
Criticism. And so you're doing it by suggestion, right? Which is essentially lying, right? That's the whole point. Is the reason you explain things by testimonial means is so you can't engage in suggestion, right? The whole reason you say things non-testimonial means is so you can gain a suggestion, which is manipulation, right? And so you're trying to use loading, framing, obscuring, fictioning, moralizing, psychologizing, the whole GSSRM spectrum, outraging, gossiping, rallying, the whole fucking thing, is because you're trying to emotionally communicate the victimhood or oppression or some reciprocity that doesn't really exist. It's just a demand for it's a child's demand for giving a donation or charity for mom and dad, right? So they had to take it away from us because it was we're informationally over time we're better, even if they're informationally better in time. So we have to deal with the fact that is what they're doing, is emotional manipulation is actually always false. In other words, if you can't say it rationally, why are you saying it emotionally? So, well, you say, because I want to get your attention. Okay. So now that you've used emotion to get my attention, is what you're saying actually true and reciprocal? And according to the what we call the natural law, which I won't recite the whole fucking chain again, because I already done it twice in this goddamn conversation. So, we know we can outlaw it, right?
Right.
This is a point. I want to make a point. We know we can outlaw. Can we outlaw the data? Probably not. I'm not sure can we outlaw the ability? Probably not. Can we outlaw the use? Absolutely. It's because it's just a resource, right? Like any other. Hard to outlaw a resource, right? We can outlaw the application of a resource. We can outlaw the misapplication of violence. We can outlaw the misapplication of what do you call it? Coercion by suggestion, which is really just emotional loading and freighting. So sure, we can outlaw it. I mean, we've talked about how to do it here. I mean, it's not it. So I'm watching your face because I can't figure if I was convinced you or not, or you want to move on.
I'm sold. That
Right,
works.
So
The issue,
I usually you come up with some fucking objection, like, yeah, but you know, they're corrupt, they're gonna do it anyway, the whatever. And I'm like, well, I mean, those are policing actions. So I'm sitting here drawing this out a little bit, waiting for the skeptic, you know, the stoic skeptic to come in here and say, yeah, but they're bad fucking people anyway. They're gonna try to do it. So
well, of course they are. Of course they are. There's like liars gotta lie. They gotta try to innovate if necessary. Every time you build a roadblock, they're gonna try to figure out a way around it. It's okay.
all they do is get more subtle in the means of deceit, right? It's like advertising. And you know, it's like, you remember the canonical example of them taking the razor blade on the sheet of sandpaper and shaving the sand. I don't know if you know about this, but it's the example we're taught in false advertising, or when you talk about advertising. So
okay.
there was, I don't know if it was Gillette or who, took a sheet of sandpaper and they showed that the blade would shave. And there was no glue on the sandpaper. They were just pulling this stuff that wasn't attached off and then shaving with it. Well, that's false advertising, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
And the opposite example is the how do you sell a Nazi car to a Jewish city, which is the selling the Volkswagen as a hippie vehicle in post-war America, which it worked. Right, they created this brand for it, right? That okay. Now, is that anything dishonest about that? No, there's nothing. I mean, it's not the fact that the Nazis invented the Beatles.
Irreciprocal.
What?
It wasn't irreciprocal.
It wasn't irreciprocal at all. So, now you know Marxism is a cult, right? It's a hard problem, but the whole Marxist series, which I try to answer 2 or 3 a day with my chart of showing it's a religion and its evolution from female to Abrahamic to Marxist, you know, and I'm just still watching. It's like they can't fathom it, right? But they stop talking afterward. I mean, the minute
you're talking to,
what?
I don't understand.
If I just run my test, right? I'm saying, can people recognize the pattern that I'm putting in? And of course, James Lindsay is, I mean, because he plays their game, right? I mean, he's really great at the insult emotional game, and he's fucking funny, right? But he also knows their shit inside and out, right? I mean, so he knows what game they're playing. Can he filter it into a logic that's insertable into the law that can be prohibited? No, but I mean, he's doing a good job of getting out there that it's a cult.
Yes.
And so, so I play this. I'm sending this goddamn thing. I'm just wondering if people can actually get it, right? And you know, they don't get it the first time. It's too hard for them, but they get it after a while.
Well, I see it as a rising what would I call it? A rising consciousness.
Yes.
Inside the popular consciousness is that the woke thing is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming increasingly robust in its
dogma
expression in the public sphere, which is to say it's not very loud, but it's getting louder and rapidly.
So could we use our law to prohibit it? Absolutely, because we can disambiguate it, right? We can break it down into its first principles, how it's violating each of the laws of the nature, therefore generating false promise. You know, basically it's fraud, right? They're saying that you can create a lot of frauds by social construction that persist over time. That's their argument. Well, I mean, I agree, but that doesn't mean it's good for people. I mean, if you gave out the right dose of heroin to everybody, you know, and manage that correctly, you could achieve this similar addictive effects. Doesn't mean it's good for people, right? And it doesn't mean it will produce the end what you promise. So,
Right.
I think we can outlaw it, but I feel like you haven't made me feel satisfied that I've made my point, because you haven't raised enough objections. Which
What
is,
what point is it that I'm objecting to, please?
you're
Just
not objecting enough, and so I feel like I didn't do my job, because usually you've got a couple of three there, and it's the fun part comes out of all those objections. So I'll go back to, yes, they collect data.
Yes.
They're collecting consumer data. There's an asymmetry of knowledge. It may or may not be an advantage to us. I mean, but it doesn't look like it's a disadvantage to us. Political knowledge is absolutely.
What they're doing. One of my objections is that they are mandating that the information be provided by the consumer to the collector. And so they're trying to manipulate the circumstances to prevent you from not providing that information to them with their computerized cars or whatever.
A couple things, okay. Very few of us give a shit, right? So if you look at the number of people who actually use blocking software, it's all crazy fucking right-wing nerds like us, right? I'm not one of them, by the way. I don't care, right? The second thing is, I'm fully aware of how they, because I've worked on it, how they use this information, which is, you know, if you bought this thing and this thing and this thing, or if you've web surfed this thing, and this thing, then I might want to display an ad because everybody else that did that did you too. Okay, I'd rather have that than the ad I don't give a shit about, and I'd rather have the ads than have to fucking pay for it. So I don't look at it as a problem. In other words, it's not a problem. Now, here's another example. I might look at something up, like I'll watch a movie, right? And they'll use some fucking explosive or some drug, right? In the movie. I'm like, does that even exist? Because I don't think that exists, right? I'll look it up. Well, I mean, over time, I look up a lot of stupid shit, right? Because I'm on a fringe, right? I do research on fringes, right? Because that's where all the interesting stuff is on the borderline between sea and land, right? I mean, and so all the crazy shit's at the border, right? So I look up, you know, but am I that different from every other guy who looks up crazy shit, that, you know, car accidents and crap like that? No, you know, they're just like, well, we can't sell anything to these people because nobody wants to be associated with it. So there's no sale opportunity there. So it doesn't matter. Right. Is the FBI give this shit? No. The only time the FBI is going to look at shit is if I look up how to build, you know, make RDX in my home, and then, you know, something shit happens and they can say, see, now I know you looked it up. That's right. It's not like you didn't know how to do this. Right. I mean, you can't really do anything about it. Now, when it comes to politics, the same thing. It's like, I don't really have a problem with them knowing what I want to hear about. Right? I don't see why I don't want to know that. What I care about is them lying to me. In other words, I don't see any value in anyone understanding what we want. My problem is we're not getting what we want from the government, and we are getting it from the commercial sector. Right? We're getting it. And second thing is, the commercial sector might be trying to sell us something, but it's usually more consumption of shit we don't fucking need. Right? Right? And then it's the small companies that are trying to sell something that's a third tier for a third tier price that is a poor use of our money. And that's where most of the ad revenue comes from, actually. It doesn't come from PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, who are selling you a goddamn thing you absolutely have made the decision about, lemon or nut, right? I mean, you've made that decision, which aftertaste you want. And, you know, you're going to go with that. And so they keep you, like, you don't see Google on their homepage advertising Coca-Cola because they don't have to. It's a bad idea. What you get there is Or what you get in fucking Twitter, which annoys the shit out of me, is some fucking Bitcoin scam. What I got on Facebook is some sixth rate service or product offering I would never invest in. But it turns out that we're not what matters to Facebook. It's the developing world, because they have no major channels for small business to operate in. So they get all this money from those people. So we tend to look at Facebook the wrong way, right? Now, my business partner, Don, he originally did the IQ stuff for, not the IQ, the personality profiling on Facebook, right?
Okay.
And they had a product, and Facebook made him take it down because it was too good. So they had actually the business where they're doing, they were using the data to profile your personality traits, which they could then
advertise to.
But they found out that they could do this through just clicks. So they didn't need to pay anybody or have anybody else get into it, right? They can, I think it takes something like 100 clicks to know basically what it's about you. In other words, it takes a very small number of things you need to click on before you're indexed at the level. It's important. The level that is sufficient precision for them to categorize you for the purpose of advertising. In other words, the granularity of what they need to know about you is relatively small. Why? Because the whole thing for an advertiser is I need to reach a lot of people, right? Not that I never need to reach 3. I mean, I can call 3 people. I can actually directly email to a couple of thousand. So the only point that these things are valuable is if it's a large number, and there's a large number of people who have common traits. So it's the common traits the large number of people have that make it valuable for me to advertise to. Otherwise, I wouldn't advertise. I would market or sell, or direct contact. So, so the problem here is really, are they manipulating you politically? And we know they fucking did. And it was way worse. And you guys, I have to live for the rest of my life with you guys smacking me around for being so goddamn optimistic about that. And it was way worse. And you guys were right. It really bothers me.
About what specifically?
The conspiracy to manipulate the public through the social media stuff. I knew shit was going on, but the depth and severity of it was beyond. I mean, I just looked at it as normal human incentives. Well, that's no, it's normal people.
It is. It's just industrialized.
It's just so fucking evil that the way they were doing it is just beyond me.
Why is it beyond you? I don't understand.
I mean, because I'm a proper New England Protestant Anglo-Saxon who believes in government transparency and things.
Yeah. Another naive stuff.
I'm another fucking idiot, right? And so
unimaginable corruption.
I can't imagine people would do something that obviously criminal, is how I look at it.
So Arizona has this right now. We're over the last election, okay? What they did was that the Maricopa County has they had voting tabulator errors, which were related to the fact that someone printed the ballots to the wrong size that was not tested, and it on the election day, and it primarily occurred in the Republican districts. So you have a 3-hour long wait, and how many people were going to wait for 3 hours to vote? And so it drove away the voters and made a significant impact on the outcome of the election. We don't know what that outcome difference was, but it impacted the election severely, and there's pending lawsuits on this. And it's like this. The suggestion is that it wasn't done on purpose. And it's like, well, somebody made a decision to push a button and change the print that wasn't tested.
Well, even in tort, when it's a public matter, it doesn't matter if it's entered or not. You're liable whether you did or not. So we need to punish people, because the whole point here of punishing people is so that they don't get repeated. So what they'll do is they won't punish anybody, right? And so it'll get repeated. The problem is whoever fucking did that's liable. And the answer is the whole chain of command is liable, right? Anybody in that chain. You know why? That's why you want them to be due diligent, right? You need to do your due diligence, and we need to remove this procedural, what we'll call process procedural or hierarchical unaccountability.
That's
So
right.
one of the things that I've restored in the law is that if you're the customer, I take money from you, I give this money to this person, right? It doesn't matter how many, if it's real money or if it's a check or whatever.
Right.
Every touch of that money is responsible for how it was used. Every touch of the customer information, there's no innocence.
No space. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have no right to claims of you have no right to claim freedom from due diligence and benefit. Now you could say, and so you punish huge chains of people. Now you want to see how fast your well, here's the other one. And let's say you gave 1,000 times the error. So that means if they have a $10 error, it would be a 10,000 reward dollar for you, right? Plus the loser pays, so you have to pay for your court fees. You want to see how fast America gets rock solid in accounting, process, procedure, and customer service? It'll happen fucking overnight. Because I mean, I know what I would do. I would do an immediate audit of every goddamn. And the second thing I would do is I'd go out and immediately audit every data system for every customer I have. You know, I'd be selling it at the discount. I'd develop a methodology for it. And for documenting it. I mean, that's what consulting organizations do, right? I mean, you have auditors today, but they look at it one way. But I mean, I would do it for all sorts of things. And the auditing business would go fucking haywire for about 10 years until every fucking scrap of this shit was gone because everybody'd be terrified.
Right.
Right now, they've got it so like I'm the CEO of a public company and I'm responsible for some asshole's decision, you know, in finance in a goddamn division. You know, so the CFO is, you know, you realize how fucking impossible that is to know you know, you
Right.
gotta hire an auditor. It's just self-defense, right?
Yes.
And it's hugely expensive. And so that's why I say it takes about 10 years for a legislative directive, right, to work its way through the system. I mean, the economy, and I mean, all the policy procedures, whatever, because, you know, you don't think you're going to be subject to this thing. And all of a sudden you realize, shit, I didn't even realize. I mean, can't tell you how many times I have gone in and drawn out a company's business process on a fucking whiteboard or a Visio diagram. And they said, shit, I didn't even know we did that. I mean, it's like, it's the opposite of what you think. It's never not been that way.
Right.
And that's why computer guys are like, you can't do it that way. And they're like, well, we do it that way. You can't do it that way. It's like when the guys for SAP, you got hired do an SAP. This is so common now, it's become common knowledge. But back in the day, you would hire SAP to come in, or one of the PeopleSoft, one of the big platforms, to come in and automate your processes. And they would tell you, you do it our way. You know why? Because it's how eventually it's the way. If you're doing it differently, you're doing it wrong. So we don't modify the software you modify your business to fit the software, because the software can't make a mistake. In other words, it can't use bad judgment because it doesn't make judgments, right? And so now you're going to modify your procedure to fit the software, which is one of the things that helped business industry dramatically between 1980 and today. So the same thing happens with law, right? It just takes longer because law happens when there's an exception, like you get sued.
Right.
Like I've had to be so much more careful in person-to-person conversations after a couple lawsuits with over acquisitions I did, right? Because I'm one of the guys, like, if I say it, it's fucking law, right? But then it's like, when I might say something to you that's just, you know, you're a very handsome man and you're charming and whatever, which is all bullshit. Not in your case, but, you know.
Thank you, Curt.
Right, you know, and that all of a sudden it comes back as,
Did you or did you not? I got a spreadsheet. I couldn't even read the fucking lettering. It was so small. All these quotes that I
Whoa.
said in emails. And I'm like, you take them out. I'm like, dude, that's how I talk to people. I'm gregarious, right? Um, and I can't make a promise, but I can say I will work toward that end,
Right.
right? But they like make it like I'm making a fucking deal here that's backhanded and whatever. And I was like,
Oh my.
and so I'm like, I was like, I go. That's why I want juries, because when I go to a jury, they're like, look, this is how I do business. I tell the, and if somebody thinks they're not getting a deal, I'll try to find somewhere in the future to make. But if you don't
Right.
get a jury, you get a judge. You just get a judge or an arbitrator. They can fucking spin these stories all the shit they want. That's why you need a jury. It's why I'm not too fond on court cases without juries, is because there's too much constructivist bullshit. It's a negative version of constructivist. In other words, they try to create a story out of what they claim are facts, but it's really they're trying to create a fiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, but you can't fool a jury usually. I mean, you just like, no, I was being a nice guy. That kid, I had my best one I've ever had is my wife got on the stand and started crying. The judge
Okay.
he just threw the fucking thing out the door within seconds. Because he's like, you don't tell, Laura Doolittle wouldn't lie to you if it meant, losing the house. It just wouldn't happen. Yeah, and when you surround yourself with people like that, it becomes a thing. Right? Anyway, so I've gone down a rat hole of we have to build the trust in the society for these things, because what you were saying is true, is that they don't need to understand, but what they need to do is trust someone does and will do so. And they don't need to trust because someone says so. They need to trust because they can remember in living memory when something they didn't like was prosecuted and solved. And the same thing with this, what we started out here, is that I'm a fucking foolish puritanical New England Anglo-Saxon waspy whatever, and I'm like, well, if I was the guy in charge of this shit with talking to Twitter or Facebook, I'm like, if it isn't on a goddamn website what we're doing, I'm not doing it. Right? If we're gonna do shit, we got to do it. So like when they went after me, right? I got a notice. I don't remember when. It's like 6 months after or whatever a judge allows it, that they went in and got a hold of your stuff. Right? I actually got notified by Google and by Facebook.
Oh wow.
Twitter and all these guys, right? I got notified that they'd gone through all my stuff. I got notified by WordPress and my hosting company that they'd filed the subpoena and they went all this stuff. And yes, I can't believe any fucking people in the FBI would read the fucking thousands of pages of shit I've written.
I wouldn't envy the task.
I was kind of impressed. I mean, he basically understood it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, no, he didn't understand like the deep stuff, but he understood what I was saying. I'm like, did I say anything? It was just, I mean, you're talking about how to take over this particular city by blowing up bridge. Well, I mean, I'm just saying it. I'm telling people it can be done. That's what 5th generation warfare is about, right? I mean, it doesn't take armies to do things, and that's the problem, which is why we're going to have a civil war, is it doesn't take armies to do things. And I'm illustrating how if I was going to take over a particular city, this is how I would do it. And I picked 5 weak points in the city. I drew a map and I said what I'd have done in each one. And I said it'd take 15 guys to shut this city down. Right. And you've got 25,000 guys, the city's fucking gone. I mean, by the time they do anything but the 5 weak points, the whole place is on fire. All the fire hydrants are open. Right. I mean, the radio, the cop station radio is down, and we've taken over every asset in the goddamn place, before they can do anything about the fact that we've just shut down any way to get anywhere in the whole fucking place. And I'm like, I can do that in a goddamn I mean, it took me probably 40 minutes to figure out how to do it.
Right.
A couple of Google searches, right? I mean,
what did the guy say to that?
He's like, well, you you got to realize you could inspire somebody to do it. And now we got to,
That's a
now
fair
we're
point.
going to come after you. And I'm like, oh, you're kind of right there. I probably shouldn't do that.
That's funny right there. A good point. I appreciate that heads up.
It's like back in the day, we would write war games for war plans for
Yep.
how to, like I had this in a very subtle, more of an academic setting than a military and political one, but how to take over certain countries. And I've said, well, these are great. If you think about economics as war, right?
Yes.
Right. It's a very different way of looking at the world, and you will find a very different assessment of a political economic system and their resources. So if you say, okay, I'm going to go take over this country, how would I do it? All of a sudden you stop justifying how great you are. Now it's a via negativa approach to looking at a political system. So, the famous ones I've talked about before, Hungary, and it turned out the fucking Europeans had already done it, right? Which was fucking hysterical. I found it ironic. Should have been obvious, right? And then I talk about the really nasty one I did for Australia, right? I mean, how do you take over Australia? That's fucking horrible. I mean, I wouldn't ever talk about that one. But I'm like, the problem is it can be done, right? I mean, these things, it's not even, most of the things aren't hard. The real problem with anything that's like that is you have to either work in the Hungarian model under plausible deniability. In other words, it has to look like you're doing ordinary commercial business, or you have to do it in the you have to be able to maintain sufficient secrecy to get to the first step, which is the one.
Right.
These things aren't terribly difficult. Anyway, talking too much about things that'll get the FBI nervous again. So
we don't want to do that.
I enjoy talking to him. It's kind of
anyway. Why he did his homework.
I just think it was funny that and I'm like, well, and I was like, agreed. I probably, I don't want to inspire anybody to do that. My whole point was simple, which much more simple is you are not as powerless as you think, nor is anyone else. America is actually extremely fragile.
Yes.
Because we have taken advantage of the fact that we are an island, a very large island, for a long time. But if you look at the way we're organized, especially because the electrical grid and the communication system, extremely fragile because a big fucking place, heavily dependent upon electricity and communication.
Yes.
You break that down, and then all you have to do is interdict some parts of the. No, I'm not giving away anything that isn't common knowledge.
All right.
The rail and highway system.
Very sensitive.
Well, I mean, this is just, I'm not saying anything. If you were interested, you wouldn't find Lind talks about this openly. He's like, he's the first guy that actually went out and said, this is the problem, right? I mean, we're vulnerable to this. So it's not like you can't read a dozen or probably 100 goddamn white papers on this problem. I know I've read them, right? I mean, matter of fact, I just deleted a folder I had the other day because I was looking for disk space on all the accumulated crap I had related to this. And I'm like, I don't want to have this sitting around my goddamn hard drive, but I was just trying to make the point that the country is way more fragile than we think because we have a false sense of security, right? Yes. The government only has really 200,000 fieldable soldiers, right? The rest of them are support, maintenance, and administration, whatever. And there's only so many, and I uncounted for all the cops on the planet, right? How many cops there are, how many cities can actually defend themselves with a police force, and then it's only a couple, and how many guard units there are, and then you just take the defect rate. What's your participated defect rate per? Right, and it's pretty obvious by certain parts of the country, and it's like, they just don't have any guys. And it's a fucking big place. It's not like this is, it's
impressively big.
It's just huge. So, and it's highly dependent upon this extremely efficient but very fragile system working all the time. Otherwise, the whole just-in-time delivery and manufacturing and food production. We saw this during the COVID scare when people couldn't go to the produce, or the price of eggs right now because chickens.
Oh my Lord!
I mean, there's a great one.
we didn't poison the rice, and they said we should have back in the Vietnam War. Imagine if we just poisoned the rice. Because there's rice molds, right? There are rice molds. We just sprayed rice molds on rice fields, and the fucking war would have been over. But we won't do that kind of stuff, right? We won't do that stuff. But the same thing for, how hard would it be to spread very simple diseases, to poultry? We just killed what, 20% of the fucking poultry population recently, right? How hard is it to spread that around to the poultry, dairy, beef, pork industries?
I'm flashing my mind on the fact that some 250,000 people crossed the border in December alone.
Right. Can't do anything about it.
It's like you don't know who's in that group.
It's this I'm just saying that we want to solve the problem that you and I and the rest of the team work on, of solving the problem of political conflict before that happens. Because the illusion that we are secure, safe from internal conflict is a pretty scary fucking illusion, when we're actually one of the most fragile places, because we're large, diverse, and we're in the middle of such political conflict. And as others have said, not just me, and I'm not talking about other talking heads, I'm talking about people whose job it is to figure this shit out. They said, the basic problem is it'll devolve into house to house warfare. I don't want it to fucking happen, which is, I don't know why that's an immoral thing. So if I was going to do something like the FBI did with Twitter or Facebook, or like all the intel people they've brought into these companies, if I was these companies, or if I was the government, I'm like, we're doing this for these reasons. This is what I would even say, this is what we have to defend our own group against, right? And this is what we're guaranteeing you, right? And this is who's liable if it doesn't work. Okay, that is transparency.
Yes.
Right. Which is what, frankly, most corporations would do internally, right? If you're going to play that game, just be fucking truthful about it.
What's funny is Musk, I was just reading this morning, Musk discovered some secret tags that were attached to accounts, like invisible tags that were, and he's like, the whole thing was designed to suppress people.
Well, and I think the worst part is that you could be forgiven that the tags persist. And so it was a cultural problem. And cultural problems are notoriously difficult to fix. I would say that there's cultural successes are difficult to imitate. PepsiCo is somebody I wish I could say bad things about, but if you look at how they operate, it's kind of awe-inspiringly good. There are other companies that are for similar reasons, because they have family products. They're incredibly careful about what they do. And there's a sense of the Wild West that happened in the tech business, which we should expect to have happened when a bunch of young males without a lot of life experience take a new technology and explore what's possible with it. So we've had some of that. But as always, Americans are unlike the Europeans, and the Europeans are very defensive of the consumer. In other words, they still have a peasant versus aristocracy culture, which they don't think of that way, but it's endemic, right? It's metaphysical. They don't even realize they think of in terms of peasants and aristocracy.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a subconscious reflex.
Right. Germans are the most notorious for it. They have too much trust in the aristocracy, because they historically did have worth. It was worth to trust them, because the aristocracy was small enough to work in their self-interest all the time. So, but then you go off into today, we have these new guys develop a new aristocracy over there, over in California. The problem is that aristocracy is only a 1/3 white. And of that white, it's that 1/3 white, it's like 1% conservative. It's actually mostly liberal. So you have this huge new technological leap that's made possible by a bunch of people who have no tradition of transparency and morality, like us old-fashioned New Englanders. And you Kentucky, were you from Virginia, Kentucky? Where are you from? I can't remember.
All over.
One of those.
Was raised in Virginia.
Virginia, that's right. And so we have very long traditions in the old East Coast families, right? And so these things are taken for granted, but they don't exist out there. And it's one of the charming things about being out there is that you realize that they don't have those things. They have other things instead. And so this is, unfortunately, because we're not the Europeans, this is what capitalism does, right? Let the market figure it out. And if, it gets really out of hand, we'll handle it. But generally, they figure this shit out, and we regulate as a last resort, because they demonstrated sufficient malfeasance that we can't it was like the financial sector crap, right? We can't not regulate them because they've done something so evil that, Enron type stuff. We've done stuff so evil that we're irresponsible for not regulating it. So that's right. Because we have a post hoc legal system, whereas Europe is a propter hoc, right? They do things beforehand, right? If I use that term correctly. So in Europe, the minute they see something, they regulate it, right? And that's how they consider themselves being good nannies. Right. So they do things early. There's virtues to both systems. Their problem is they regulate it such that you can't experiment. In our case, we experiment, but we don't correct early enough.
Right. So there was a conversation came up this week in my professional activities. I was talking to some people, and it was related to the driverless vehicles. And the conversation came up because I had a conversation with or I sent an email to the local representative, state representative, because I heard they were testing driverless semis in Arizona. And I'm like, this has to be made illegal. This shouldn't be allowed at all, ever. And I will tell you the reasoning behind it, because it's not. I don't worry that someone will think of and create a backdoor to hack that system. I guarantee that it will be built in from the get-go when they build the software, because it will be advantageous to me later. And it's not trustworthy. In the aggregate, all they have to do is turn off the trucks and you're done.
In other words, what you don't like is that the trucks can be, because the trucks aren't operated by individuals, there's no longer the moral.
It's a weapon system.
Yeah.
That is essential for the
operation. That's actually legit.
Right?
That's legit. I wouldn't even say, I don't care about everything you said I'm going to say, the developers are not stupid, whatever. Right. But they can do that stuff for reasonable reasons. Right. The problem is now it's a political weapon that you can shut down trucking, which is what your argument is. Right.
Wait, no, that's just the beginning of it, which is to say, it's a weapon system because I can make that truck do things in addition to not work.
Well, I think you're confusing programs with AIs, and it's really fucking hard to screw with an AI. No,
All right, all I'm saying is this is it's just an unacceptable risk for my nation.
so I don't like the politicization of it, right? I don't like the unemployment of that many guys.
Well, that's what so I sent the email to this state rep. State rep sends me back the message. I got an email from him. I left a phone message, the first thing. Then I get an email. The email says, well, they tell me there's going to be a million truck driver shortfall. So we have to. And I'm like, I sent back the response, which is, that's a million guys looking for work. In addition to the security risk, which I detailed in that discourse, no response.
No, they're not, because he can't respond to you. He has no way of he has to have something to predict. When you're saying your intuition is predicting, he needs something that isn't intuitionistic. He needs something to go by. And he can't do it off of what you're saying to him unless he shares your intuitions. And so this is the problem what a lot of people get into in the office is they're not trying to, they have to have the problem of they have to explain their decision making to a lot of people with something that they can actually make use of. They can actually make use of saying there's a this. They can make use of how many drivers fall asleep or do this shit, and right? They have reasons. I would say that the problem, of course, is I would say there's whether it's an insurance question, right? And so if it's safer, in fact, to have these things, I would prefer that they do what they do in Teslas, which is you try to do something stupid, it corrects you. All right, rather than having it be entirely out of your control. And I think that's a good solution for AIs, because I'm like everyone else. I've tried to change lanes when I could have sworn I checked my dead spots, right? And and it was just the light or the color of the cars or the velocity that relative, because under the right circumstances, somebody can approach your car at the right velocity where no matter what you do, you can't see them, right? These things happen. So I've tried to do that. Or, one of the things like I brought up earlier, the natural reaction for a driver is to try to avoid crashing into what's in front of them, despite the fact that that's actually the least bad option, because the things in other people are always, whereas everybody else is in a worse position. So it's counterintuitive to actually just put the fucking brakes on and hit what's in front of you.
Take the hit, right?
That's the actually safest option most of the time, right? If for no other reason than the chances of you hitting a static object, right, are smaller, right? Whereas what happens is anyway. So there's all sorts of stuff that could be done like that would correct it. I have a pretty good handle on how these things work for highway trucking, right? For long distance trucking. It's pretty hard to argue with long distance trucking automation for the same reason it's hard to deal with rail, because rail handles long distance really heavy, really well. Just like ocean liners, we call them cargo ships, handle long distance really heavy, really well. It's the last 10 miles of the fucking problem, right? And I just, the ability for machines to do that is very questionable to me. And that's where all the risk is. The risk isn't really out on, what we're going to really see is you're going to see us building lanes for these fucking trucks, right? And separating cars, because we've done this in New York, New Jersey, and a few places, is to separate cars and trucks. It's a really good fucking idea, right? So we'll see that happen. That might happen. Great. This is the real question. Can electric ever do more than that? I don't think so. Because we just don't have, I'm not the only guy who's saying that there's a limit to what electric vehicles, there's a very far lower limit to how many electric vehicles we can produce and use than we assume. And it's one thing it's like there's the great value of having wind and solar is very small, because the wind and the solar is never where the cities are, right? And transmission cost and drop, right? Transmission friction is too high. So unless you can actually load a battery and then bring it fucking somewhere, you've got this problem of, you're still winding up electrons in a field around a goddamn copper or something, right?
Right.
So I like your thought. I just think that it's the concept of taking things too far that is ridiculous. Like, I think that the long distance trucking, that's hard on people. I mean, if you look at what long distance truckers do, it's fucking lonely. It's hard on their relationships. It's hard on them physically. And they can make money at it. But, there's a lot of shit we move around that by truck here and rail and stuff that that I don't see why it's not automatable. Whereas there's a great deal of stuff that's local, that's from distribution centers, that I can't see being.
My concern is related to the security of those systems to provide the service.
Okay, so let's take it and say where you're absolutely correct. We could have a sunspot and right, a sunspot eruption, right? And because our trucks are all electric and whatever, we could starve to death.
Yeah.
Whereas we can put, I mean, I'm not exactly how to Faraday cage a car engine. I mean, I haven't looked into this, but I mean, I assume it's possible to insulate the electronics from that, because old cars still work, right? And if you have a fucking distributor cap, I mean, it's like it's one step above a goddamn steam engine, right? As long as there's gas moving somewhere and burn.
Right.
So, but modern cars, of course, they have like computers in them for all this shit, and one good oops, and maybe that's not the case. And so I can see that. And same thing for satellite communications. If they're run by satellite, that's a problem. So you're right on all those fronts. I feel like
I wish I drew more joy from it.
Well, no, I mean, I like this conversation because it's a great example of how our tendency is to extrapolate a curve, right, into as a line, right? So extrapolate, everybody's going to have electric cars. It's not going to fucking happen.
No.
Are we going to have electric planes? That's an interesting question. Because you can, there's a very interesting weight problem.
Right.
We could solve. That would be very interesting.
Right? That's right.
Right. But, so we're going to have that many electric cars. I'm kind of on the side of everybody that says, look, if you just look at the material cost and the carbon footprint and all of a sudden add up everything, it's not the panacea.
Well, no, now that the Swiss made it illegal to operate them. Did you hear that?
No.
They're worried about their grid being overstressed.
Oh yeah, no. Well, that's true. That's a real issue, right? So you do have, I mean, we do have the problem of you have to, I mean, I think Musk talks about this pretty often. It's like, the car is just the beginning, right? We've got the infrastructure and whatever. And, I'm agree that his thing is we can solve this distribution problem, but in his mind, he's thinking it's going to take me 4 more battery generations to get to where this is possible. That's X number of years. That's 3 generations of cars. Or, I mean, he's thinking about it in those terms, which is okay. It's the same way he thinks about space exploration. It's not that we want chemical rockets to take us to fucking, other planets. And so we've got to get good at this whole process of, what? Sorry?
The whole process of development of the technology.
The development of the technology, and over time we'll get there, which is, I mean, I don't, we've been doing software like this since the 90s, right? That's when we started thinking like this. And he's just taken that software development strategy and applied it to manufacturing as where it needed to be. Whereas manufacturing and capital costs didn't think like he does, or at least it originally did back in the Henry Ford days, but now we've fucking used this globalism stuff to achieve what it's actually turned out to be a hindrance rather than an opportunity. And so we've extracted so many rents from the car production system. And we've experimented to the point where we know there are basically 5 car designs. And there's no point in having it. It's not almost like there's no point in having more than one car manufacturer, except that they employ a lot of people in every country, right? And so everybody wants to have their own production. But I mean, it's like, I was like BMW and Audi, and Toyota. It's like you number your cars, right? Because that's all that matters. And there's only 5 designs, and you just use those, and everything else is that you change the styling enough so you can have a status perk of looking like you have a newer version, when the styling has to rotate like clothes do and colors do for the same reason, because there's only so many modifications you can do. So it's just kind of silly, really, just kind of comical that we keep all this nonsense going about car brands and manufacturers and whatever, when, it's just, if everybody's eventually going to make the same car, except for who's make the Subaru? They're the one that make the 4 wheels that always go anywhere.
All-wheel drive.
Right. Or Mazda, who makes like the cheap version. Right. If you want to buy in the Honda spectrum, you do that just because you like a little more. You want the car to last 10,000 years instead of 1,000, like a Toyota, right? If you want to have a status, you buy a German car, and you want to buy a Mercedes because they take more risks with new features and shit and virtue signaling, and so, but you got to pay part of the virtue signaling is sort of like a Ferrari. Shit just goes wrong because of all the technology in it. You step down to BMW, and it's a little less so than go down to Audi, and it's a little less so. And then you go to Honda, it's a little less so. And you go to you go on a Toyota, and they're like the major manufacturer in the world. Why? Because they only use 15 parts to make every car, right? It's the same. They have so few parts that, right? And the way they think about things is just like, yeah, well, it's got to run over third world roads and, these conditions, and it's got to last for people spilling their lattes on it and shit, and right, whatever it is. So it's just how utility versus virtue, and then you go to my favorite brand is Ferrari, of course. Or the Ferraris have actually got into making pretty amazing cars now. They've gotten out to where my Ferrari, in order to change the fucking oil, you pretty much had to take the goddamn engine out of the car, right? And you had to buy a new transmission about every 25,000 miles, and that did involve taking the engine out of the car, right? So they're basically race cars, and they treated them like, now you buy one of these, a sedan Ferrari, not one of the, I want to pretend I'm a race car driver cars. If you want the GT cars, the fucking thing might as well be a goddamn Audi.
Right.
You drive the thing as a daily driver. I drove mine as a daily driver. I fucking loved it. You've got a Ferrari. I don't get the point of keeping in the garage. Like, it's like having a hot wife and not screwing her.
Oh my. Oh my.
Sorry, I'm being a chattermouth this morning.
You're doing all right. We did pretty good work.
Okay, so are we going to actually work tomorrow?
Yeah, let's do some work.
All right.
Does that work for you?
Yeah. As long as I just want to deal with, we'll do this. Brad and I've talked about this, right? Is that I get pretty self-conscious when I'm working on when we're doing a work session. Right. And because I got to scroll around a lot and, think a bit.
That's right. That's right. It
And
takes
Brad
time.
and I got to talk about how we're going to phrase this paragraph, and we're going to get into actually writing now, and so that's tedious. So I guess what we agreed on is we might record them, but we probably won't publish them, or we'll.
That's fine.
Is that all right? Because I don't the psychological impact it has on me.
Now, if it's adversely affecting you, it's not worth
positive.
doing.
I
So
don't
we
want
just don't publish them.
don't want to think about the I need and they say, well, why record them at all? The reason is I actually go back over this stuff. Like if we cover a topic, I'll go back over it when I'm working on it and say, oh shit, we came up Brett, he was right again, damn it.
To put it on your tick mark.
Right, or and sometimes it's just damn funny.
Right.
Or somebody it just makes me fucking laugh. So I think that I don't know if I'm going to publish our sessions, right? I might record them, but
That's
I don't
fine.
want to publish
Well,
them.
just because it's like, as long as it's not making you adversely influencing your state.
Yeah, and so we need to get back to where we're cranking.
That's right.
Other housekeeping. I'm starting to have meaningful conversations with Martin about how to do the philosophy, and for some reason I didn't get the point across last time, so we'll see if we can work on that this week. I'm continuing to do more interviews with Luke on his book.
Yep.
If the audience hasn't seen that conversation, it's worth having. One of the more interesting reasons having that conversation is that it's the simplicity of his work belies the sophistication of it.
Yes.
Right. And so I think one of the things I was trying to draw out in this interview is that what he's doing is very sophisticated, and it isn't obvious that he's reduced it to something that's tangible for the ordinary person from the bottom up. And that he could basically write 15 books, right? Just incrementally working through what you need to be. And that would be, it'd be a gift to mankind if he can do it. I'm not sure the economics make sense for him, but
right.
But it would be a gift to mankind if he did. Brandon and I are still working. Brandon had a baby, right? Yay!
Congratulations.
And she had an easy labor and everything. It was really good.
Good.
So, she's a bit of a thing too. Brandon's not a big guy either, right? He's shorter than I am, and he's not bulky, right? He's just a fit, thin guy, right? And she's a little bit of a thing too. She's like, I don't know, she's under 110 pounds. And so I was like, wow, easy labor. So I was very happy. And so we're going to continue as soon as he's back online. We'll continue working on finishing out the subject of the website. Ian, who is going through the content of the website and making corrections, is back at it. Fortunately I had to take his permissions away because he'd locked some stuff I was working on, because WordPress will lock things. So now I give him back. At least I think I have. Anyway, I'll get that. I haven't done it. I think I needed his email address because I wasn't sure which account was his. As far as I know, I haven't got an update from him yet. So Walter is going out and collecting the quotes that we've asked from everybody, which I would actually consider being myself. I would find that a fun. I would put on bad science fiction movies. Like I would queue them up, and I would get out some food and some coffee and some munchies, get in the comfy chair, sit with a laptop, and just copy paste that shit. Because I'd be laughing about it all goddamn day long, right? But it's just like it's a month or two's worth of work to go. Right? So he's on that. So we've covered. I'm missing a couple people, right? But there's more going on. So we're moving.
Good.
We're moving. All right. Thank you. Love you, brother. Thank you for this. I'm sorry I'm talking speed talking so much today, and I have no idea why. So
it's all right. We're
Right.
good. We'll see you done tomorrow and get back to work.
All right. Love you, man. Thank you.
All right.
I'm just going to stop the recording.